Hey, Pete, it's Joby from Mill Valley. Just wanted to congratulate you on your 500th episode. Been a long-time listener since back in your POTUS days during the, it was noon out here, but I guess it was 3 o'clock out there. And as I've told everybody I talk to, this new format that you're doing with the podcast, with the longer form interviews, is just such a vast improvement over any of those corporate shows that you did, that I'm glad you found a home doing it. I'm so excited to hear and see your success and wish you all the best in the future. And I will keep supporting and keep listening. Happy 2022. Thanks, my friend.
Stand up.
Hello and welcome to Taint Week Day 2. My name is Pete Dominic. This, of course, is Stand Up, but you already knew that because you pressed play or downloaded or subscribed to the podcast. Very happy to have you here on a special Taint Week. I even wrote a song, a limerick, a jingle for it, and just in case those of you that don't quite know what Taint Week is, here's how it goes. It's the week between Christmas and New Year's when all through the land not an email was stirring, not even a plan. But this is the week when there is no clue but to think about last year and what's left to do. You see, the taint is the space between your back and your front, and on Taint Week, there's nothing left but to laugh and to grunt. So as you wander through this labelless week, let's stand up with Pete, help you with all that you seek. It's dumb. I was on drugs when I wrote it, but I did write it, so I figured I'd share it with you. Okay, folks, I hope you're getting a lot done or nothing at all, or, I don't know, you're just suspended in animation for the entire week. I'm very happy to have you listening to today's podcast. I have 2 excellent guests. I just thought maybe this week it's starting to become a theme, at least yesterday with Jonathan Alter and today with James Fallows, 2 of the most respected authors of our time come on the show, and great conversations with both. And also historian and professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat joins me for a really important and fascinating and maybe slightly terrifying conversation about where we're at with our dwindling democracy. James Fallows and Ruth Ben-Ghiat both joining me today. Normally I would do the news at this time, but boy, if I told you what was going on today and why I didn't get to it, you would probably understand. So I think I'm settling on getting the news on at least 3 days during this Taint Week. But regardless, I'm going to have each day great conversations on the podcast for you to listen, learn, and laugh along with me, because that's what we do. We'll hang out on Thursday night. I'll tell you about it all. I'll hear about your week, and we will exchange stories, experiences, and more as always. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, please consider a subscription. And I've got a lot of folks have reached out to me just in the last couple of days alone to let me know that they have made a donation to givewell.org. Still time before New Year's. Go to givewell.org/standup right now, and you will learn all about this amazing organization that does more to save lives and prevent suffering than any other organization that I know of, which is why I partner with them here on Stand Up and this final week of the year. So go right now, givewell.org/standup. And now it's time to get to my first guest of today's show. Coming up, the great James Fallows. He is a legendary journalist. He started a new Substack newsletter, which is called Breaking the News, and I had an awesome conversation with him yesterday. I also caught up, though, with scholar and historian Ruth Ben-Ghiat, and that is where we go now. She is a professor at NYU. She is a historian, like I said, and the author of Strong Men, Mussolini to the President. You should subscribe to her newsletter as well. It's called Lucid, lucid.substack.com. It's so great and important. And she, of course, is on Twitter at Ruth Ben-Ghiat. I hope you'll subscribe to her there or let her know that you heard her here on the show. Let's do it. All right, I've just told you all about her. You probably already know because she's joined me before. You've probably seen her on CNN or elsewhere. And I'm very excited to have Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat back on the program. Way too much to talk about. It's been way too long. But you've wrapped up the semester. The papers are graded. Fascism is still on the march, and so we still need to keep talking. Before I even let you say hello, thank you so much for your very thoughtful message on my 500th show. It's been so great to have you be a part of so many shows. We've learned so much from being in your virtual classroom. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. And I've learned a lot from you, and you're the best interviewer. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, you're too kind. You should do more interviews. There's got to be more better people. No, you do a lot. And that's a public service, really, what you're doing. You're taking your academic, your scholarship, your authorship, and sharing it with us. And we greatly appreciate it. And that's why, again, I recommend people sign up and pay for a subscription to Lucid, which is Ruth's newsletter. And it's so great. And she has a great community that she's building there. So here's a weird hypothetical, and maybe you just want to toss this in the garbage. I just haven't heard the experts like you answer it. If Donald Trump isn't the nominee in 2024, will Mike Pompeo, Ron DeSantis, or Mike Lindell, given they are the nominee, be able to carry out the playbook that certainly Trump and his minions are building to overthrow the election?
In theory, yes. I don't see Lindell. There's also now we're hearing about a truly terrifying Mike Flynn.
Oh, running for the nomination. Interesting.
Who's being supported now by Eric Prince and Roger Stone, and who's talking about a Marxist insurgency that has to be put down. And as you recall, he wanted to have martial law declared. Very, very, they're all dangerous in different ways. But he being able to radicalize the military is particularly dangerous. Yeah, we're seeing such an interesting / awful, horrible, but interesting time, because it's like Donald Trump started everything. I mean, the GOP was already evolving toward, and away from democracy. It had already kind of, its political culture was already heading this way. But then Trump, he gave everybody, like, he created a movement, he gave the leader cult, and he did all kinds of like brilliant propaganda for so many years. And so it and then you had January 6th, and it like radicalized further the party and all these people and all the work Trump did to make them like an authoritarian party. So now the system is they have momentum. And so in theory, because the states are becoming laboratories of autocracy, especially Florida, I've written a couple of MSNBC and CNN pieces on DeSantis, what he's doing, terrifying stuff. And it could go on with another person. And who that is going to determine exactly what kind of bad thing it is. But any of them could see it through.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And I want to ask you about DeSantis specifically. I didn't see those pieces, and I will go back and read them, because I think that, he is deserves to be written a lot about and examined what he's doing. So one thing that he did has also happened in my community. And of course, you've written all about this because it's a tactic, whether they know it or not, which is changing the definition of words. So we're having unfortunately, the folks in my community showing up at the board meetings. They've already gotten rid of the superintendent where we live. They're going for the principal now, and it's a CRT thing. It's the playbook that you're seeing all over the nation. And we had the leader of that movement stand up and say, anytime you hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, that means CRT, which would be news to my mom, who was a teacher in the Syracuse City School Districts, teaching DIE, implementing those tactics in the 80s and 90s. Anyway, that's also what Ron DeSantis said last week. He said, when you hear the word equity, it means, of course, equity, a word used throughout the history of jurisprudence, is my understanding. The word changing. Help me understand where this comes from and what the playbook is.
Yeah, equity is also just the basic of democracy. It's the equality. It's also being treated equally before the law. I mean, I'm not in law, but it's a pretty basic thing. And DeSantis has embraced the entire kind of playbook. And one of the things that I was going to write on his, this made news, that he wanted to revive the state guard, like a state national guard. And 22 states already have them, but in DeSantis' hands, it could clearly become something kind of autocratic. So I set out to research what he was doing and for this piece, and I found something in a way even more scary, because the as we know, not only old style voter suppression, but there's this attempt to take control of the entire election system. And Bannon's very open about it and all of them. And the new catchword is election integrity.
Yeah.
And what that means is stealing the election, because authoritarian language, because you want to talk about language, it's the opposite. So what's good becomes evil. Democracy becomes tyranny. And I've been kind of tweeting / trolling Josh Mandel.
I saw, and I saw
everything he says. You simply invert it. Like literally, you just take any tweet and you invert it, and it's really incredible. So Ron DeSantis is opening this legal agency under his own domain about election integrity, and it's going to have its own prosecutors, its own investigators, and it's going to hunt down people who are violating election integrity, election law. And you can imagine, if he has his own prosecutors and investigators, all the abuses. Any election official you don't like, if the election goes Democratic, you could say they're violating the law, put them on trial, and jail them. So that's the kind of thing that's happening at the state level that, unless you're there, it might fly under the radar. I didn't know about it, and I was totally horrified.
I mean, it also terrorizes the 75-year-old lady who is working at the poll or counting ballots, who's a volunteer. They don't want to go to jail. I mean, you mentioned, was it you or somebody else? I think Mike Lindell was basically saying these people, that counted the votes or something should be, say, executed or something.
An associate of his said that they should be treated like people after the Nuremberg trials. They should be, executed and hung. I mean, this is autocratic talk. And, it's easy to think it might just be bluster, but all over the country, there's this just basically the old GOP kind of election trickery and racially motivated voter suppression is now souped up with this culture of threat. And you're seeing it at school boards, you're seeing it in election workers. And one of the things I've been following, and I wrote a piece some time ago for the Washington Post, is how election workers and poll workers are being politicized. So the ones that are not going to be loyalists are being threatened and forced out. And there's all these laws targeting what are volunteer positions called poll watchers. And in some states like Wisconsin and Texas, the laws say you could be like close enough to, quote, hear and see what the voter is doing. And remember, in Texas, for example, they could be heavily armed. So you've got some goon with, a long gun who is watching what you're doing. And there's even one bill I'm watching that's going through, it's in committee, that it's about curbside voting in Texas, that the armed person, theoretically armed person, could come into your car while you're voting and watch what you're doing. So this is like military junta stuff at this point. So that's what we're heading toward in a way, is this combination of electoral trickery and enforcers, armed enforcers.
I can't wait. I can't wait till that conversation. Sir, are you going to be able to fit in the car with all of your tactical gear that you brought to the election day? Your bulletproof armor and your helmet and your guns. You mentioned, though, I mean, was this a New York Times investigation? This just came out maybe a week ago or something. I mean, massive stories, by the way, just not getting enough attention because they get buried by the next massive story. Investigating into January 6th, the election, et cetera. But a poll worker, I want to say in Georgia, getting a visit from Kanye West's consigliere, his lawyer, threatening her. Basically, something bad's going to happen to you. She's then seen on video. She's a poll worker counting votes. Then Donald Trump outs her name, says her name, black woman, I believe. Are you familiar with this story? Because this is just a poll worker who's done nothing wrong, and all of a sudden the loudest person in the world is doxing her.
Yeah, and the way that we have to put ourselves in the mentality of the thugs, autocrats, and their followers, and this is what, to write my book Strongman, I had to live in their heads for 2 years, which was not very fun, but it's useful at times like this. So what they're doing is, it's not only about scaring this one person, because you could say, who cares about this one person? It's to scare everybody else. It's to set an example.
Well, I didn't finish that. And just to be clear, to pressure her to say that there was fraud or that she did something. It wasn't, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's that you have to, this is very like Orwellian, very fascist, that they have to publicly confess their truth. They have to confess to having, that they weren't saying the truth, and now they're going to say the truth on the record. And this is like the show trials kind of thing. And so but the point of this, and the reason it has to be public, this confession, is to set an example for everybody else. And so there's another term called autocratic capture. And that's when autocrats capture the election machinery. And what that means is that you get rid of everybody who's not loyal, and by threat, right? And then you staff all of the election machinery, the judiciary, bureaucracy with loyalists, with zealots, with fanatics. And that's what, Trump was doing that for 4 years. And now it's the election, very targeted on the election. And some of what he did, like at the Department of Justice, that's been, when Trump left, new people came in, but they had a real assault on the EPA, on the Department of State. So this is all this kind of autocratic capture. And now it's just focused on the election machinery.
You promoted Jason Stanley's piece of The Guardian, getting a lot of attention. I just listened to this interview with Timothy Snyder on NPR. These are colleagues of yours, or peers of yours that talk about similar issues and so on. And I think, Jason Stanley writes about Toni Morrison's 1995 commencement speech. And in this piece, he talks a lot about the racial dynamic, which has certainly been at play in the history of this country. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on how that's playing out. Again, that's happening in my town. Again, someone just shared a Facebook video of a black girl beating up a white girl, saying it was a racial thing. And, it's clearly not the whole story. And I know that for sure. But this is happening. I'm saying it's happening where in small and large ways, purposely and not. What are your thoughts about the racial dynamic and how that's being used?
Yeah. So in my book, I looked for patterns. And one of the patterns you find all around the world is that these strongmen and their radicalized followers have an appeal when a country's gone through a lot of social change and social progress. Some places that means racial emancipation, racial equity. And we had Barack Obama for 8 years. We were very well set to have this kind of reaction because of Barack Obama, also Kamala Harris, legalization of same-sex marriage. But to keep to the race thing. So Donald Trump, I think in late 2015, I wrote one of my first op-eds for CNN on Trump, and I wanted to call it Donald Trump's race war, because that was too inflammatory in 2015. So they titled it something else. But this is what's been going on. It's people who are afraid of demographic change, whites being marginalized. And so here comes Trump, who reads the political marketplace and realizes there's a space for this, and can build. And what he did was to take all of the older racists, and pro-Confederate, the Klan, the extremists, and then he made it palatable because of who he is to a whole new slew of people. And you see that in January 6th. You had like Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, and then you had all these individuals who are more recently radicalized. And he made it okay to be a racist. You could be proud to be a racist. You could be proud to be violent. And so that's why I've always thought of it as a race war. And it's terrifying. But this is what happens in countries after there's been a lot of change. It's like a reaction, very clear. Like the strongman comes up, holds the stop sign up, or they invent something like, with Hitler and the Jews were like less than 1% of the population, but they become the symbol of all the other things: communists, feminists, everyone who you have to put down. So we have that too.
Your book and every appearance and everything that you write, along with the peers I mentioned and many more, is evidence as to why historians who are expert on authoritarianism, and in this case, I think fascism, are the second most important people in the country, only to epidemiologists. And and that's why I was blown away to see that you hosted Dr. Peter Hotez at Lucid, and everybody should go. That's why you should subscribe to Lucid. I think the best example of what we're talking about here might be, there's probably more just came to mind as you were talking about it. Georgia, with Stacey Abrams running for governor in 2018, and then the reaction to what a lot of people saw evidence of purging the rolls of black voters and so on. And then the reaction to that being a whole bunch of black-led activism in Georgia to help elect these two Democrats as senator, including Raphael Warnock and a Jewish man named John Ossoff. That's the reaction, and that's what we're seeing. I feel like Georgia is a good microcosm of the example that we're talking about in terms of race. Being that.
Yeah, and I also, I say a lot of scary things, but I also talk a lot and write about resistance and about the cycles of politics. And so you're very right to see Georgia as this kind of microcosm, because although the things that are going on, the race war, all of the things we've talked about are very evident. We have to see them for what they are. But we just had this. I just interviewed Jelani Cobb. It came out yesterday. I haven't even promoted it yet.
Oh, great!
It came out yesterday.
He's great. Nice guy too.
And we talked about, because we can never forget that Black Lives Matter protests, which were multi-generational and multiracial, but based in outrage over racial injustice and police brutality, were the largest social mobilization movement in history. Of this country. 15 to 26 million people participated in a Black Lives Matter protest.
Oh, wow.
And that energy directly contributed to our as a people, doing this amazing thing, which is very rare, to vote out an autocrat in the middle of his capture of power. Because Donald Trump was steaming through with help of Barr and Pompeo and all those people, and it was interrupted. And so I was talking to Jelani saying, do we see this as, both of us think there's going to be another round of these energies have not gone away. All this righteousness, this love of country, and not to see it, ruined by these autocrats, these corrupt people, these haters. So it's a very dynamic time.
I'm upset to hear that. I believe Jelani is also a historian, right?
Yes, he is. That's why it was great to talk to him.
So tell me. So I've got, I think in my mind right now, I've got Jason Stanley, Jared Yates Sexton, Timothy Snyder, Jelani Cobb, and Ruth Ben Ghiat. I haven't asked my friend Kenneth C. Davis, but maybe Ann Applebaum. I'm trying to think. Is anybody not on that page? All the people I just mentioned are all saying the same thing about what they see coming. The train is anybody that is a peer of yours, like saying, well, slow down, you guys, pump the brakes. Are you guys all in a text chain?
No, we're not. We talk, and people who are, there's all kinds of conversations that go on among democracy people. I'm in touch with former congressmen, and there's all kinds of conversations that go on. What I've also added to the mix is a third of my book is about military coups. And I had no idea that was going to be so relevant. And that's not something that a lot of these other people work on.
Right.
So I've been charting very closely, monitoring what's going on with the military. And that's why we recently saw that 3 retired generals said very clearly what I've been fearing. And I don't pronounce on that because I'm not in the military, nor have I ever been. But I know that all the conditions for radicalization of the military are there. And I wrote, I think it was in August, an essay in Lucid about the danger and what they should do. And then some of those recommendations that I made, again, as a historian of coups, were made by these generals who really know what's going on.
Yeah, they wrote together, these three generals, in a Washington Post op-ed. They said, as we approach the first anniversary of deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, we, all of us, former senior military officials, are increasingly concerned about the aftermath of 2024 presidential election and the potential for lethal chaos inside our military, which would put all Americans at risk. In short, we are chilled to our bones at the thought of a coup succeeding next time. I read that legitimately while lying in bed, and then I tried to go to sleep the other night, and it was... Luckily, I can apparently sleep through being attacked.
And my essay in August for Lucid was called "When the military becomes a right-wing authoritarian tool," and based on talking about coups. That's why I'm worried about Michael Flynn so much all the time, because he's the playbook that some of these people are trying to implement is right out of these Cold War coups, like what happened in Chile in 1973, where you have a very concerted attempt to delegitimize the sitting government. Now, in Chile, you had a socialist president. He was not aligned with Moscow, and he was a reformist. But here, they're saying that Biden is a socialist, and Flynn's talking about Marxist insurgency, which is communists running the place. Total lie.
Yeah.
But that doesn't matter. And so that's the playbook they're trying to implement, where you drum up, you get people so worried and so panicked and in a survivalist mode that they will accept whatever authoritarian action you do. And the military, that's going to be the big thing. That's why those generals wrote that, because we have the most powerful military in the world. And it would take a military campaign to shut down the next January 6th. But what will that look like? How many military are already radicalized? That's why they're writing that.
Last point or question is about your maybe one of your most recent pieces at Lucid. Lucid.substack.com, everybody. You got to subscribe. Ruth has been warning and unfortunately always been right. It's titled "When Coup Planning Becomes Public. Controlling the flow of information is key to whether your coup succeeds or not." Another undercovered story, in my opinion. There was a PowerPoint for the coup.
Yeah. So yes, this Mark Meadows turned it over to the January 6th committee, and we're still learning more about the authors, but I was very interested, building on what we just said, that one of the part about declaring a national emergency, a state of emergency, was done by this retired colonel from the Army, Phil Waldron, who was a psychological warfare specialist, as is Bannon, as is Roger Stone. A lot of these people are what we've been seeing and what we've been up against and under barrage from is psychological warfare, well as more traditional propaganda.
Yeah, I see it. I see it in my town. I see it in my town. They repeat it. It's like I see it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So this PowerPoint, this is what it had: every element of how to pull off a coup by inventing a Marxist enemy. And in this case, it was the Chinese, who have taken over our electoral machinery and various other things. Sufficient. So the idea was they would, declare a national emergency, a national security emergency. And so I read, when I saw that, I did one piece for MSNBC on states of emergency. But for Lucid, I can get a little more creative.
Good.
So I followed out this reasoning of like, well, wait a minute, coups are supposed to be secret. That's the whole point of them. But we're living through this super interesting period because we're still a democracy. And we have incredible investigative journalism going on about January 6th and a committee. So we're seeing all this stuff come out. And so I wanted to write about what happens when a coup planning becomes public.
It's such a great piece and so important. We just can't end on that scary moment. Your favorite holiday meal or tradition? Is there anything that you're looking for? What do you got for me?
Yeah, so my mother's from Scotland, and a lot of the family's in England. And so we've had a family tradition. I started going to England when I was 2 and been countless times. And so in your stocking, you always have Cadbury bar and an orange or a clementine, whatever is available, and some other little English candy that's terrible for your teeth, like jelly babies.
Yeah.
They rot your teeth immediately, but they're really good. And so I've done this every year, and I've passed this on to my daughter. And so in her stocking, there's always those 3 things.
I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. And I would also say, if it were me, I would throw that orange right across the room to get right to the goodies.
That's the last thing that gets eaten, if at all.
At least it gets eaten. Thank you so much for joining me this entire year. Thank you for your kind words on my 500th show, and keep up the great work. I've learned so much. We've learned so much from you here on the show and all of your other appearances, and of course, at Lucid. Get the book. As always, all the links in the show notes. Happy holidays, and thank you so much.
You too.
Yes, at Ruth Ben Ghiat, everybody, on Twitter. So great. Always love talking to her. Subscribe to her newsletter, lucid.substack.com as well. And please don't forget to donate to givewell.org/standup. Okay, I slipped it in. And now it's time to get to another legendary journalist, a guy who I have looked up to and idolized in so many ways. I mean, I just think this guy, I don't like to use the word idolized, but of all the journalists, when it comes to journalists, I really do feel that this guy's just special. He's unique, he's kind, he's thoughtful, he's absolutely brilliant. He is a contributing writer at The Atlantic and has been since the 70s, the late 70s. He reported extensively from outside the United States. He once worked as President Jimmy Carter's chief speechwriter. He's also a licensed pilot, an aviation enthusiast, an author. He won the National Magazine Award in 2002, also won National Book Award for his nonfiction book about national defense, and so many more. I mean, he's won so many awards. Founding chairman of New America Foundation. I honestly could go on for 5 minutes about all he's accomplished. And most importantly, I think to him probably, and any journalist, is to have the respect of his colleagues, which he does in tenfold. So James Fallows on Twitter, and he too has a great new newsletter, which I highly recommend that you subscribe to. You can get to it in the show links. It's called Breaking the News, and you can get to it. Go to fallows.substack.com. Again, links to Breaking the News in the show notes. I think I said show links, show notes, same thing, right? Okay, Ruth Ben Ghiat and James Fallows on one show. It's a hell of a show, even if I didn't do the news, which I'm feeling guilty about. But James Fallows will save us, as he always does. Let's do it. All right, well, I've just told you all about him, and I'm so excited to get an opportunity to talk to him whenever I can. And I'm very excited about being a subscriber to his new newsletter, Breaking the News. The legend, James Fallows, joining me now. What a surprise to have you here. I'm so excited.
Mr. Dominic, always a pleasure. So thank you, and season's greetings to you and everyone in the force field here.
I have some pretty strong opinions about what this week means, but I would like to get your take. It's the week between Christmas and New Year's. Do you have any way to function or label what this week generally means or does? How do you feel? What should we be doing during this week? Working, not working, living, suspending time?
So I lack at the moment a general answer to that. I'll give you a specific answer that what my wife, Deb, whom you've met many times, and I are doing. We have 2 grown sons and 5 little grandchildren whom we haven't seen forever. So the main thing we're doing this week is seeing sequentially one of our sons and his family in Dallas, and then the other one of our sons and his family in Bend, Oregon, from which I speak to you right now, where it's freezing cold and snowy. So I think that at this moment in American history, seeing one's family is what this time of the year is for, and then contemplating the various struggles ahead. I'm really grateful to be seeing my 2 sons, their respective wives, and the 5 total little grandchildren.
Sorry, we can't allow that answer. The answer was work. Just work really hard during this week. Take no time off. That's wonderful. I love that. I think it's a great idea. Maybe we should, dedicate it to that. No working, be with the people that you at least love and care about. Based on that, you've written for years about climate issues and so on. I don't talk enough to people in the American West, and I'm starting to get this weird feeling that it's, I've always thought it's one of the most beautiful places on earth to live, Pacific Northwest, West Coast, California in general. I wonder if people are having second thoughts about the future of their investments, their homes, and just living, a lifestyle out there based on specifically wildfires. Is that a conversation that your son and folks out there have, or I have no idea what I'm talking about because I don't talk to enough folks out there?
Oh, it very much is on everybody's mind. And so, as you know, but I can tell some of the listeners, I grew up in Southern California, in inland Southern California, in San Bernardino County. And that's the part of California that Joan Didion, recently deceased as we speak, wrote about. And one of her most famous stories, Some Dreamers of the Golden Dream, was about the place where I grew up. It was about, she talked about sort of this sun-blasted hellscape of inland Southern California, which was invented by water that was brought in from Lake Owens, from other parts of the region, from the Colorado River. And I think everybody in the West knows that its existence is both charmed and fragile. Fragile because of water supply, fragile because of heat, fragile because of the wildfires. My son and his family, who now live in Bend, had been living outside Santa Barbara, and their existence in the last 10 years had been affected very much by wildfires, and that is the case too. And so I think that people in the West, I will speak with my bias as being from here, you see yourself as being more affected by nature and in its beautiful ways over the decades of the ocean and the mountains and the desert and everything else. But now sort of the teeth of climate change are coming down as hard here as they are in different ways in New Orleans and as they will be in Florida. I do think that the part of the country, just to extend this for a second more, my wife Deb is from the Great Lakes region. She grew up on the shores of Lake Erie. And it's possible that what has been dismissively referred to as the Rust Belt, et cetera, may be the fresh water belt. That is a place that climate change may drive some people to.
I've heard that, and partially because I'm from Syracuse, upstate New York, and I've got a friend who's and listener, hello Kevin, who's growing an orchard with a plan for 10 years, 20 years down the line about how the climate's going to change and how certain trees that would have, thrived in North Carolina will now do better in upstate New York, and how we are kind of planning and looking at the future in terms of where the best places to live will be based on climate. Is that kind of what you're saying in terms of adapting to?
Very much so. And I think that normally I live in Washington, D.C. That's where we've been based for a long time. While living overseas, our home has been in D.C. And the most striking difference between DC and the rest of the world is, I think, on this issue where the political and media discourse out of the East Coast has been more or less assuming that climate change can be debated or, that it's not really settled. But most of the younger people and conservation-minded older people we've met around the country in the travels Deb and I have done have recognized that the world they live in is changing. And the rainfall is changing, and it's getting more in the east and less in the west. And just the annual temperatures are changing, and what nature will allow is changing too. So I think that people who are my children's generation and their children's generation are recognizing the world they are living in will be different, and how they live will be different too. Yeah,
really well said, and really important for folks to think about. Breaking the News is the new newsletter. Everybody that subscribes, if you subscribe to me, subscribe to Fallows. Without Fallows, there's no me. And that was a subtle insult, as a matter of fact, because you're better than that. 25 years ago, you wrote a book, it was controversial then, called Breaking the News, How the Media Undermine American Democracy. This is why I respect you and why I respect others, because credibility is something that can be measured. if you're writing about a thing, you're examining a thing, and you're thinking a thing, and in ways predicting a thing will happen if a thing doesn't change, and then it happens, you get more credibility. If it doesn't happen, you lose credibility. You wrote this 25 years ago, how the media undermine American democracy. I guess the question about breaking the news is, where's your crystal ball? Where's your time machine? Where do you hide
it? So I had in putting out that book, when I was working for The Atlantic, then under Bill Whitworth, who was its legendary editor through that period, and working with a wonderful woman named Linda Healy, who was my editor at Pantheon Books. And I just decided I was exasperated with the difference between the game of politics, which was what DC-based journalism was sort of thriving on, and the reality of governance, and the reality of life, and the reality of everything from climate change to education to health to, you name it, that people lived with, and which is what most people care about in how their government works. I thought, I've had enough of this. The ancient movie Network, I sort of was feeling like, I'm mad as hell. I can't take it anymore. And it was not a really popular book among my colleagues in the DC media, as you can imagine. But I think that most of the things I was talking about, unfortunately, are worse now. And that's when I started this Substack site. I wanted to resurrect that title, Breaking the News, because it's an evergreen topic, as you so well know yourself.
Yeah, it certainly is. And what, for example, did you foresee, and it's actually, kind of happened or worse?
So I think here's something that I foresaw in a tiny, like a scene from some horror movie where early on you say, no, don't open that door. No, don't go that way. This book came out about 2 weeks before Fox News debuted as a cable channel. And so I was saying, there's a real danger in having this kind of polarization of the news media where it's just driven by entertainment and ratings, that anything that captures eyeballs drives out, what people should know. And I don't need to tell you how that has all unfolded in a horror movie scenario over the last while. I think that there is one other thing that I was foreseeing that I think may still be, if not fixable, at least if we're aware of it, something, we might be able to mitigate the effects. And I was talking about the difference. I used, Bill Clinton was in his first term as president when I wrote this book. And I contrasted the questions that were asked at a standard White House press conference with the questions that teenagers asked Clinton when he went out to see people in Harlem or in any place on the road. I had a couple of pages of side by side. The White House press corps questions were all, what do you make of criticism on this front? How are you going to handle your declining poll ratings in this latest poll? It was all about politics as political pros viewed it. Whereas what teenagers asked was, how am I going to learn job skills to get a job here? What am I going to do about my parents who have this or that disease? And so I was saying that if the political press just insisted on treating everything as a political maneuvering issue, they would decrease attention to what they did, the press itself, and they would finally make people fatalistic about the process of governance itself, because it would just become like pro wrestling. All you care about is how entertaining it was. And I think that has, we're 25 years further down that path. But people in the media in all its forms, including you, who find ways to direct people's attention to how we live and how we make decisions that affect our individual and collective future, there are ways in which we can do something, bend the arc of history back in a more positive direction.
So well said. Subscribe now. I'm just going to keep saying it, to Breaking the News. There's a link to it in the show notes, and James Fallows can talk and write about just about anything. Do you have a cultural blind spot?
I have many. Don't ask me about opera.
Okay. I won't. You know what?
And don't hold on don't a second. Ask me about the Middle East, where I've rarely been.
Well, there goes the rest of the interview. Thanks for joining me. That's all I had prepared for. But we could talk. You can talk about beer. You can talk about aviation. You can talk about China and many of the other places that you have been. And that is why you're an American treasure, because your career has taken you and your wife, Deb, and your family all over the world. And you've covered just about every beat for the Atlantic, magazine, and I'm very excited that you're doing the newsletter. So there's a lot to talk about with breaking the news, obviously things that you've been writing about and publishing, and I could talk with you about media forever, but I kind of want to talk a little bit about national security, because you've written a lot about defense. And let me just take a second to set this up, because it's the most important thing to me right now. COVID has killed probably 1 million people officially, like in America.
Yes.
9/11, killed 3,000, and it was a terrorist attack, and this is a disease. But I've always wanted to think about national security as what the main threats to our lives are, what's going to kill us. And it feels like it's not that far-fetched to think about the virus as an enemy that must be beaten, as almost even as an alien. It's not extraterrestrial, but it's outside of our body. And yet, even though we're under this in this invasion, we cannot come together enough, it would seem, even though we have these brilliant miracle vaccines created in record time. And that's where I'm stuck right now. Why do we not take this as a national security issue and other health, related issues potentially that are more likely to kill us than, foreign invasion of some sort, or even the, ragtag group of terrorists?
That is an excellent question for which I don't have an equally excellent answer, but I'll give you some piecemeal answers. So one of the earliest pieces I did for The Atlantic, which I joined, I worked for Jimmy Carter. Side note, a former president of the United States when he was in the White House. And I started working for The Atlantic after working for him as a speechwriter. One of the first pieces I did was to go interview people in the Pentagon, and this is in the early 1980s, about how to think about national security in ways broader than, are the Soviet tanks of that era going to roar through the Fulda Gap and invade Germany again, which they were never going to do. It's a different matter now with Russia, but anyhow. So, and even then, people in the Pentagon in the early 1980s, a long time ago, 40 years ago almost, were saying that the two of the main issues they were concerned about were climate change. The Pentagon in the early 1980s was thinking about its military bases, its ship bases, which are obviously on the seacoast, and how they will be affected, and pandemic disease. This has been, if you were in the Pentagon, you'd be thinking about pandemic and climate change as long-term issues. I'll jump ahead to a piece I did, a long piece about 1.5 years ago in The Atlantic, viewing the first 6 months of the U.S. COVID response the way the NTSB would view an aviation disaster, and where the chain of causation began and ended. And so it is within our technical power to have limited the disastrous effect of this more than we had. So I think it is still within our power to bend things in a more positive direction. I think that the current administration, the previous administration, did about as bad a job as one could have done, except for speeding the development of the vaccines, which was a near miraculous success. And if only they had labeled these as the Trump vaccines, I think we'd be better off now. I think I don't know. The politicization of almost everything has come to the management of this huge disaster, which I'll say one other thing. I remember early in the spring of 2020 thinking it would be an enormous milestone for the U.S. when more people died of the disease than had died in the Vietnam War, which was in the, let's say, 50 to 60,000 range. Now, of course, we're orders of magnitude ahead of that, and the desensitization is profound. And I let out a sigh rather than giving any further answer.
But say a bit about that desensitization and why it matters, because I think that's a really covered issue, and I try to bring it up every day in the podcast. I almost get emotional right now thinking about how if 1,300 or so people are losing their lives every day, how we become somehow it's just what it's going to be to a disease that has a vaccine that would prevent those people from dying. I think it's almost entirely fair to say.
And it is. I'll tell you something. I'll mention something I have never discussed in public, which is I have members of my own family. 3 of my cousins died of COVID, and they're from a branch of the family that is very different from the branch of the family I'm in. They were They were not vaccinated. They were not going to get vaccinated. They were everything you would say demographically about people who refused to get vaccinated was true of these cousins of mine who died within the past year. And so I am aware of the impact of this disease. The worst part of this is there are other aspects of American life, especially the toll of guns. Where 100 people a day on average in the U.S. die from gunfire in one way or another. Crime, which we think it's not going to affect us. We don't care. Traffic accidents, et cetera. At least they have improved. There are the toll of poverty and despair in various ways. Opioid deaths. I think that something that is cruel about human nature in general, which is if you think that it's not going to affect me, then over time I don't care who it affects. That has been compounded by the politicization the last while, and it's I don't know what to say more than what you are doing every day to point out the desensitization, which is different in this case from most in that the combination of people not inviting their own fate, but being more susceptible to their own fate if they refuse to get the vaccine, which hurts them most, but hurts all of us, especially the medical cadre of our country who are just pressed beyond limits. Again, I don't have that's a great question for which I don't have a good answer.
Well, I mean, you mentioned gun death, you mentioned opioid death, and these are such more complex issues to try to solve, where they're so nuanced with the root of where they start and how to address them, and fentanyl getting into the country and so on. But I just get so frustrated because this one isn't. We have the shot. I'll come over. I'll bring it to you. You don't have to get up, Patriot. I'll bring it right at you. And you don't have to do anything. And yet they won't do it. And then people, unfortunately, like your cousins, and I'm sorry for your loss, and anybody else's, end up paying, the ultimate price. And it's just so, it seems like so much more preventable than some of these other issues. Yet we desensitize ourselves against all of them and think they won't happen to us. In fact, they do.
Yes, and I'll confess to a huge failure of imagination on my part. A year and a half ago, I could not have imagined that people would not have sort of the self-preservation impulse to get the vaccines. I assumed that there'd be a lot of sort of fuss to say, oh yeah, I'm against vaccines. But once they started being around, and once millions of people had gotten them, and once the disease was spreading, you wouldn't see more than a handful of people refusing to get vaccines. And what I thought would happen in general is what's happened with most employment mandates. With most employment mandates, once they said, okay, airline crews, you got to have the vaccine, there'd be a fuss, but then 99% of the people would get them. I thought that would be true of the public as a whole. And it has not been. There's this residuum of 30% of the people who won't do it. I can't explain that. It is bad for all of us. It's obviously worst of all for those people, and I didn't see this coming.
I wish you would stop telling me what to do. That seems to be like, I keep hearing that as I'm like, that's what you're mad about? That somebody's telling you what to do? I'm just telling you to pull your parachute. I'm just saying pull the cord. That's all I'm telling you to do. If you don't want to, you don't have to, but you're going to slam into the ground most likely. But don't you think that a lot of this comes back to, you've written, of course, about this for years, and you've unfortunately seen it throughout your career and life, as well as I think probably can give us a perspective in terms of how it's seen in other cultures, in other nations. The lack of, what is the word, the degradation of respect for institutions, specifically government. So when it comes to public education, public transportation, and now public health, we don't trust the experts, and therein lies why I am suspect of the vaccines that they came up with.
Yes, and I think this is a manufactured suspicion in very, very recent history. And I'll give you this example. There's, there've been New Yorker cartoons and other things of people on an airline flight saying, oh, why do these pilots know any better than we do? I'll go up in the cockpit. And there are certain areas of life where people still think, what the hell are you saying? Of course, we're not going to go up and fly the airplane. The pilots are up there. Of course, we're not going to intervene during heart surgery. We're going to, let the people who are the surgeons do it, or brain surgery or whatever. But somehow there's been a manufactured last year and a half, Trump era, Bannon era, Fox era. Who are these experts to tell us what to do? And if it's anything from schools to particularly the medical care now. And so people have pointed out, you've pointed out the hypocrisy of, don't tell me about this vaccine, but once I am hospitalized and getting intubated, then do everything you can to save me. Although some people even don't do that. So I think that there are these latent traits in human nature which are bad, but we're seeing the effect of theirs being revved up, to speed 11 over the last year and a half. And again, living and dying with the consequences.
Or even worse, some of my doctor friends tell me, what could be more outrageous than you're in the hospital and you're being treated by a physician and you're demanding, or your family member is demanding a treatment that they're not allowed to give you. In a way, people are doing exactly what you said. You would never tell your heart surgeon, let me operate. But in a way, they kind of are. They're like telling the surgeon, you give me ivermectin, that's going to be the thing. And then the surgeon's like, we don't have any. We don't keep it. We don't keep any. Well, I brought you some. Here you go. Give it to my dad. It'll save his life. And it's like I feel like that's a Rubicon we've only recently crossed when people are bringing the treatments to the doctors and insisting that they give them. That's somewhat new.
Yes, and I think that as we've discussed before, the one bitter virtue of both living through a lot of American history, as I have, and reading a lot of American history, as all of us have, is recognizing how many times our country has almost gone crazy in this past. And in many ways, we are almost going crazy now again. And the question, as always in this nation's past, is how the going crazy force balances against the buffering back to sanity force. And that's the struggle we're all in and girding up for in our new year.
I could ask you about anything and talk to you forever, but I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to end on somewhat of a fun-ish note, and maybe I won't because I haven't read this piece yet, but unless there's something terrible about it. This is going back to the James Fallows Substack, Breaking the News, which you must subscribe to, or you hate America. This is titled, They Promised Us Flying Cars. There's very few reporters who are, cover aviation the way you do, fly themselves, pilots. This is certainly an issue that so many of us are wondering about and thought would happen during our time. This is a great piece as I scroll through it. Where is my flying car?
Your flying car is going to be there. So there are developments. There are going to be battery-powered flying cars, which will take you essentially from, what rich people can do with helicopters now, or in succession with their helicopters, people will be able to do with their battery-powered short-range flying cars. There's going to be high-speed regional, like tube flying cars. So I was at some conference, I think in November of 2021, where I was asking all these young entrepreneurs, will I personally, Jim Fallows, be able to ride on your flying cars, given that I'm a member of the boomer cohort, the dreaded boomer cohort? And they said, yes, these flying cars will be around on your watch. So if they're around on my watch, they're going to be around for many people's watches. So yes, they promised us flying cars, and flying cars we shall have.
Just to be clear, will there be all different types, or are we just talking about the one that I'm seeing the most of, which is basically a giant drone, meaning a whole bunch of rotors and like a two-seater?
Well, the point of the rotors, and I've seen some, and actually I've flown a sort of in simulation VR one of these. They can have 6 to 8 seats. So they're small capacity. The reason they have the rotors is so they can be like helicopters. Right. They can take off from a parking lot or a school lot or whatever. So that they have the rotors switch in flight, and they have the batteries, and they can't take you from the coast to coast, but they can take you 50 miles or whatever. And that will make a big difference. And their brethren can take you 200 or 300 miles. So yes, this is an area to feel better about.
But can you argue for the practicality of the flying car, or is it just a novelty?
You can argue for the practicality. I mean, if you look particularly at Los Angeles, for example, which is part of where I grew up, life there is paralyzed by freeway traffic, and commuting is bad for everything. And so the people who are inventing these flying cars, and I have, if you look for my Substack post, which called "They Promise Us Flying Cars," I go into all of this, that they have a more sustainable transportation model than cars are now, but it's based on the same battery revolution that is driving electric cars now, too.
When I had a thought this afternoon, I said, you know what, I'd really love to have somebody on tomorrow's show that's super smart and a great journalist, I thought. And I said, let me just go for the guy, my reach goal, not my safety school. And I said, let me reach out to Fallows. I'm sure he's probably doing something, but the fact that you were available and able to talk to me tonight really changed the trajectory of my day and my week, and now I get to share it with everybody else. I'm so excited and appreciative that you made time, and now you get to go back to be with your grandkids, which I'm sure you prefer. Thank you very, very much, sir.
Pete, it's always a pleasure and honor to be on with you, so thank you for having me.
All right, there he goes, James Fallows, one of the greatest journalists of our time on Stand Up and Pete Dominic podcast. Yeah, we're doing it. Same thing with the award-winning, very highly respected scholar and historian Ruth Ghiat, two very qualified, highly intelligent, experienced, credible experts, and great guests on the show as well. So good at communicating all of these issues off the cuff, off the top of their head. And I'm forever in both their debt because I love talking to them, and they've both been very generous to me throughout this experiment and before, certainly with Fallows. Ruth Ghiat is a fairly new guest, but Fallows I've been talking to for years. Either way, to have both of them on one show, big deal to me, and makes me very happy and feel very honored. And thank you very much for supporting the show, because I couldn't interview these great guests without your support. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider it. A couple people signing up over the holidays, and that looked and felt great. Thank you. Welcome, one and all, to our community. I hope that you'll hang out with us on Thursday night at the Hangout, anytime on the Discord platform. And if you're feeling a little lost, that's what Paint Week is all about. If you're not sure why you're feeling down or bad, well, you probably know it's just the COVID stuff is really defeating us in many ways right now. Certainly it is me. And so I'm just kind of waiting to get it at this point. I don't know about you, but it really sucks. But that's where we're at right now, and I'm here to commiserate and connect with you and ride alongside you. So thank you very much for listening and supporting the podcast, and I will talk to you tomorrow, where I'm sure we'll get a news segment on and much more. John Carroll taking us out right now. You better stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.